I'll be talking mainly, I'll be focusing on the commercial aspect of real estate, and from the legal perspective, some insights that I've seen, changes that I've seen in deals, and sort of some points about how we could deal with transactions and what we could do during this sort of time where we're not so busy with the transactions. So one thing I noticed, just like with all residential deals, the volume has decreased for numerous factors such as the increased interest rates. So the volume is down, but one thing I noticed that we were talking earlier, every deal is a little bit more complicated. Deals are more complicated, financing is a little bit difficult. So we really try to stay on top of things to make sure that when the deal comes to us, the client's at ease. We have all the answers, right? So with the volume being down, one thing I wanted to mention was we really want to focus on the relationship with the client. We want to make sure that any answers they have, any questions they have, we have everything right there for them. With commercial transactions, it's a little bit different from residential. They're a little bit more complex depending on the location of the place, and like I said, every file is different. So we always approach everything where we try not to refer it or base it on a previous transaction. We try to go with an open mind and see what's needed. So one thing I've noticed in terms of deals is that we've actually been getting a lot more private deals, where a potential buyer will come to me and say, hey Steph, I have this property in Etobicoke that I want to buy. I don't want to use a realtor. Can you represent me? And that's what I've noticed a lot more coming, as opposed to getting deals from other agents. With the deals themselves, like I was mentioning, as opposed to your typical search for residential, these could be a little bit more complex. We could have any environmental issues, electrical, fire, and like I said, it really depends on the location of the property, what's the tenant purposes, and if there's any issues. We have one closing today where the owners actually have two properties, one beside each other, and it actually merged. Yeah. So we had to get a severance. And depending on the city, so I'm based out of Hamilton, the property's in Hamilton, we had to wait over 7 months to get severance. And that could really kill a deal, right? So our goal is to really make sure the transaction is going to go smoothly. Are we following up with any city reps? Are we following up with any searches? And what's the timeline as well? Because with any client, we want to close as soon as possible. So one thing I've also noticed with commercial deals, as opposed to residential deals, the biggest issue we're having right now, at least on the legal side that I'm noticing, is financing. Finance is taking a lot longer, especially if you're a first-time buyer and it's your first major purchase. It's very time-consuming. They're going to go through all your records, all your financials. We got accountants here, so they could give you a better idea of what they have to look for as well, but it's a very complex matter. It's not going to be resolved overnight. Anything can come up as well. Maybe depending on how long, when the APS was signed and when the closing is, they may have to do another search. If 6, 7, 8 months went by, especially if it's a big purchase, they want to make sure that your business is still cash flow. Right? You're still,
What's APS?
So agreement purchase and sale. Sorry about that. So it really depends. There's a million factors, and we try to approach each deal differently. We want to see what's going on, what's the client's intentions, and we go from there. Now, I have a question. How many of you dealt with any commercial deals yourself personally? Okay. How many about residential? Most of us here? Perfect. One thing we always try to do as well with our files is, the biggest question is, when do you get the lawyer involved? Do you get the lawyer involved in the agreement of purchase and sale? I corrected myself this time. When it's signed, do we do it when it's negotiating? We will always say that we want to be there before anything's signed. We want to assist in drafting the agreement of purchase and sale. We want to do our due diligence beforehand. The reason we do that is because we want to make sure that the client's best interests are taken care of. And if we're involved at the beginning, we have a better understanding of the property and a better ability to make sure that we can have an influence in drafting the agreement of purchase and sale. We can look at the previous history, we can do our searches in advance, and we can see, are there any issues with zoning? Do we have any electrical issues, fire issues? There are a lot of issues, and with commercial properties, they may not be able to be resolved overnight. So we want to make sure we have the time to fix any potential issues before closing. And to do that, we want to make sure everything's in the agreement of purchase and sale to give us the time that we may have, maybe 60 days, 90 days, to do our due diligence. One thing we also wanted to mention was, as lawyers, besides getting involved at the beginning, you really want to go to someone, a trusted professional. You don't want to go to someone who has no experience in commercial or development or residential. That's why we say, having a team that you're working with, the mortgage agent if applicable, real estate agent if applicable, the lawyer, you want to have a team of trusted professionals. You want to know that when you go to someone and have a question, like the lawyer for example, you're going to get those answers. And with many of these purchases being extremely with the price-wise being a lot more increased than residential, there's a lot of money at stake. And I always say, I approach each deal like as if I'm purchasing. I want to make sure everything's taken care of. Any answers I have, I want it to be resolved right away. So with commercial, especially with the amount of money that's being invested, you want to make sure that you're dealing with a team of professionals that's going to have your back and really look out for your interest. Too often we see, at least on the legal side, just when they're dealing with a lawyer, almost instantly you could see their experience. Have they done this before? What's the communication like with them? And from there we can usually get a sense of whether that lawyer has that experience to do so, to do that transaction, or if they don't. For many deals we've noticed a lot of the lawyers, especially now when every dollar counts, maybe they'll go to someone a little bit cheaper. Everyone can choose their own lawyer, but you want to make sure that if it's a matter of a couple $100, you want to go to the trusted professional. You don't want to go to a lawyer who, at least in my experience, who does maybe 10 areas of law and may not be an expert in that area of law. I always say you pay for the quality that you get. So, if it's a matter of a couple $100 more, I always say go with the better choice. Before we go into more, so with your platform, what I was gonna ask, and I think it's a great idea. What's the biggest question you think buyers have when they're looking at the what are the questions that they have? Like for example, you said transit, you said purchase price, owners. What else are you finding on your end when you have someone looking on the site? What are their main questions? What do they want to know?
Yeah, they want to learn some sales comps. Recent sales is a big one, saying what can I compare this sale to right off the bat. Another just generic answer would be tenants. How long are they staying? How valid is this tenant? Is this the right tenant for us? Do I want to deal with this tenant? Are they moving a lot? Is this a long lease or is it a short lease? And sometimes you can't get that information. When you ask the broker directly, they're not going to share all that insight. They want to say it has a tenant in there actively right now. They're not going to tell you the length of the lease and information like that. So clarifying it's tricky.
No, and that's really good. And that's why we say with that, when you get that information, that's why it's really important to have someone like Alex and have a trusted real estate agent as well. And aside from purchase and sales, which as I mentioned, it's really decreasing, we've actually seen an increase in leases, a lot of leases. We've seen that the vacancy rates have increased. So any potential tenants have a lot more flexibility in negotiating favorable terms. For example, in our office in North York, we actually been approached by a landlord, and we have about 7 8 months remaining on our lease, and they said, hey, we'll buy you up. We'll pay the rest of your lease, but we would love to sign you up for about a 4 or 5 year lease. We've seen a lot of that as well, and with that, we've seen potential price increases in per square foot, and then TMI, which is tax, maintenance, insurance as well. So for a lot of potential tenants or tenants that already have a place, you have a lot more options available as well, and you could again negotiate with the trusted one. As long as you have a good real estate agent and lawyer, you could negotiate some favorable terms. And again, you want to make sure you give yourself enough time for that as well. Just to go off your point, I always say everything needs to be answered yesterday. If they had any questions, they need to be answered. It needed to be answered yesterday. So for any potential issues, we want to make sure we have enough time. Especially if we're getting into any agreements for leasing or for purchase, time is of essence, right? So we want to make sure we have enough time to do everything. In terms of pricing as well, again, as opposed to during COVID, a lot of the residential properties were having 10, 15 offers, and it was a little bit wild, right? Especially if you're a first-time home buyer. What we're noticing on the commercial end is a decrease. You're not going to have, in most cases that we've dealt with, there haven't been multiple bid offers. For the most of them, they actually know each other. They know each other, or they've connected. But for the most part, at least on the private end, they've known each other. Like for the one closing today, they're actually neighbors. So it worked out perfect. But we've noticed that for a lot of these deals, they've either known each other through their business, or for example, they have a tenant, mutual tenants or whatnot. So we've noticed that on that end, deals have been a little bit more friendly because of the lack of offers. You really want to work with the other side. You want to work with the other side and make sure everybody gets what they want in the end. Purchase price, favorable terms, and that's where you really need that trusted professional. Also, let me know how much time I have, because I always say when you give a lawyer, that's a free talk. We can talk forever, so I'm just going to make sure I'm not going over time. Okay, perfect. One thing I was going to mention as well is, at least on our end, as lawyers, and you can agree to this, we often have clerks or legal assistants that work with us. Whenever there's a deal, there's a purchase, lease, and usually they are especially for purchase, the clerks are a face of the deal because they're gonna ask for all your information and they're gonna really get the file off the ground with the mortgage papers, purchase papers. So I always say, when working with a lawyer, you wanna work with a good team as well because you're gonna be working with a clerk. You wanna make sure that she's accessible. You wanna make sure she's gonna answer any questions, any preliminary questions you may have. You wanna make sure everything's done in a timely manner. So again, I'm gonna really emphasize this today. When working with professionals, you wanna make sure that you're working with their full team as well, especially lawyers, and we have clerks as well. Last thing I was gonna say, because again, a lot of the points you touched were really good and sort of connected with us. Do you have a hand up, Max?
I was wondering, would you mind touching on a couple of examples of industrial real estate transactions that you've been involved with in recent past, and maybe describe some of the considerations that maybe someone should pay attention to, whether they're on the tenant side, the purchaser side, or the seller side, whatever circumstances you've had. I think it'd be really interesting to dive into a couple of examples.
Perfect. I can use the one that's closing today. For example, so we were at the stage where there was initial interest between the neighbors. The current buyer is currently leasing the property beside, and because they need a lot more space, they've actually made an agreement to use some of the space on the neighbors' end. So it started off as a friendly conversation, and then it became more serious. So once they reached that level, my client reached out to me, the seller reached out to his lawyer. Luckily, we've done a lot of transactions together, so it's always helpful when you know the other side. From there, when talking about considerations, the first thing we did was we pulled up any title issues. So whenever, for example, there's an issue, let's say it's a numbered corporation, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Ontario Inc., we'll put that in our search. In this case, it was the Hamilton region. What we noticed right away was, the property beside. So whenever there's a property beside, we do all the searches in the area of all the properties that connect. The reason we do that is because if you have two properties, based on when you purchased it, if you had two properties together and they were the same name, they would merge. And that would have an issue because you'd have to get that severed because originally each property was different. They were each their own property. When they merge, it's now regarded as one property. So that's the property we had first. So before we got into anything, we had to talk to the seller to see if they got to the city. Did they meet their application for severance? Especially because going through the city for any development issues, depending on what city as well, especially Toronto, it takes a long time. It takes a long time. Yes, sir?
I want to add a couple of it's amazing information that Stefan's sharing because over the years we've done many transactions on the financing side, and I echo a lot of his comments. So one thing to note, all these issues usually arise at the finish line. Deals at the lawyers, we're closing today or in a couple of days, we're running the searches, there you go. Then everyone, and God forbid, there's another property that's closing, we're waiting for the funds, then everything gets derailed. So this is so important because engaging with the lawyer up front, and there's a few comments I want to say, but I'll keep it till the end so I don't want to interject, but this point is really important because it always happens at the 11th hour. Like on a Friday, we're closing and everyone is waiting, and then boom, such an issue comes up, and now we have to postpone, and then buyer and seller, and it's a big commotion. So I've seen that many times over the years.
Thank you for the comment. I was just gonna go. My client, it's his first major purchase, and he was very eager. He goes, "Steph, I want to close as soon as possible. It's my first purchase. I need this for my business." And I said, again, as professionals, real estate professionals, I think a lot of our job is to manage client expectations. And before I even gave an answer, I go, let me do my search. Let me do my initial search first, and let me see what comes up. And then, as I mentioned, we found out the two properties merged. So just to go off that, because we're retained at the beginning of the transaction, we were able to do that. We were able to submit our searches on time. For example, I know in Hamilton, one of the searches, just for a fire inspection, it took us almost 6 weeks to get somebody. Right? So you want to give yourself adequate time. Other searches, we did zoning, work orders, any health-related issues. A lot of that, again, takes time because you have to send these requests to the city, and depending on the time of the season and how busy the city is, the response times could differentiate. What normally you would get in a couple of weeks, maybe a month and a half too, right? So you have to give yourself adequate time because you want to make sure you know all the answers before, like you said, 3 days before closing, these issues will come up, because it not only looks bad on us, but it looks bad on any mortgage agent or any real estate agent or any mortgage agent. It looks bad on all of us. Because the biggest thing in this industry, especially during difficult times like this, is client retention. You want to make sure whenever a client's looking to purchase or sell, or even for a mortgage refinance, you want to be their first choice. You want to make sure you give great service. So that way, when they go down the road and they say, "Hey, I need to sell my house or purchase or mortgage," I got my dream team together. I got my lawyer, I got my real estate agent, and I got my mortgage agent. And again, it all comes down to the services that we provide and how quickly we can do it and how much time do we have. So one of the biggest things, just to go off some of the points you said, you want to give yourself enough time. You know, normally for residential closings, you give about 60 days. Usually that's about the standard, 60 to 90 days. With with commercial, you want to give yourself more time. I've seen anywhere from 6 months to 8 months, depending on the due diligence as well needed. Now, you said a couple other comments. I would like to hear, because you brought some really good points. I wanted to hear a couple more comments if you have.
So many of the things we've seen over the years is the client would be, for example, they have a corporation that they've owned for a number of years. Whether it's the way that the corporation was set up, they don't know. So for example, whether it's a holding company, an operating company. So I feel engaging with the lawyer at the onset is very important because we can also discuss the structure of the deal, whether you're gonna hold, like the way that, for example, you're gonna buy the asset under a corporation, who owns the corporation. You have other options that you can take advantage of, let's say a bear trust or a family trust, or where do you want this asset to be done? Because when you do this, if the client is sophisticated and they want to go down to this approach, it's so easy and less cumbersome and much more less expensive than doing it after the fact. Then you have to go back to the bank, go back to credit, request changes to title, and if you're moving the asset to a trust, I mean, if you're doing that at the beginning, it's going to be much easier, save you time and money. That's one. Two, I've seen many times clients, let's say, they're shocked when it comes to the bill, and it's not usually a couple of hundreds, it's a little bit more, because you gotta make a proper budget for closing, and many times they're surprised, and they're gonna know that they're gonna pick up both tabs, the one from the bank or the financing company, which is the other lawyer involved, and your own lawyer. So many times it's like, it can be anywhere from close to like 10,000-12,000 depending again on the deal side, disbursements, and all the searches that are done. So it's so important to engage with the lawyer ahead of time, because usually what they do is they leave the lawyer the final step. You know, once everything is done, they're like, okay, now we're going to close, and then these where the issues come up. Another thing I also noticed is many times clients insist in using their own lawyers, and unfortunately some of them, they have no experience in commercial real estate. And banks have specific forms that have to, they're like big set of documents. It's not just the security documents or registrations. There's usually a lot of security documents for the bank itself, and they have to be filled specifically what the bank needs. Many times it's the back and forth because the lawyer doesn't know how the bank wants it or what needs to be added there. It just prolongs the situation. So these are things that we face like real time, and honestly, it's just, at the end of the day, there's always a solution. But if you can save yourself this, frustration and then going back and forth, and it leads to a more client experience. And as you said, like it's a purchase, and usually it's in multi-million dollars. So a lot of emotions are involved, a lot of money is involved. So that's what I wanted to share. But great information.
Those are great points, really great points. And my last point was going to be, I know I talked about mortgage agents, real estate agents, and lawyers, but I wanted to save the last for accountants. Because there's a lot of considerations going into whether I put it into my holdco, do I open up another corporation. You really need to talk to or work with the accountants to see, based on their financial history and what they anticipate, what's the best situation. Because again, a lot of it has to come down to tax considerations. Right. So we want to make sure, like usually when we work with accountants, they'll send us a memo and say, based on this, we think we should be put in this name, or if we put in this name, what needs to be changed? Family trust.
State freeze.
Yeah, there's a lot of considerations as well, and again, you want to make sure you have the time to do so, because if you do it properly at the beginning, it's going to be a smooth transaction. That's what we're really looking for. Awesome. Was there any other questions? Am I good for time, Alex? Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.